What happens when a mind lost to darkness suddenly finds its way back through a single note of music? In a crowded community hall under the warm glow of stage lights, a frail elderly woman sits before a grand piano. Her hands hover over the keys, trembling. The audience holds its breath. Hundreds of eyes are fixed on her, waiting, hoping, praying for something miraculous. This is Loretta Hayes, 78 years old. A woman whose mind has been ravaged by dementia, a thief that has stolen nearly everything she once was. Could a woman who barely remembers her own name perform a complex jazz piece in front of hundreds of strangers? Could fingers that shake from age and illness suddenly remember what the mind has forgotten? What you're about to witness will leave you speechless. But to understand this moment, to truly grasp the miracle unfolding on that stage, we need to go back. Back 6 months. Back to when Loretta Hayes was just another forgotten soul in a nursing home, staring blankly at walls that held no meaning. This is her story. A story about music memory and the unbreakable bond between a grandmother and her grandson. A story that proves some things run deeper than memory itself. 6 months earlier, in a modest nursing home on the outskirts of New Orleans, an old woman sat slumped in a wheelchair by a window. Her name was Loretta Hayes, though she rarely responded to it anymore. The staff knew little about her past, just another elderly resident in a facility full of them, another fading light in a room of dimming souls. But Loretta Hayes had not always been this way. Once, decades ago, she had been someone whose name was spoken with reverence in the smoky jazz clubs of New Orleans. Loretta Sweetkeys Hayes, a pianist whose fingers could make a piano weep, laugh, and sing all in the same breath. A black woman who had fought for her place on those stages in the 1960s and 70s, when the world was not kind to people who looked like her, when music was one of the few languages that could bridge the divide. She had played alongside legends, had filled rooms with melodies that made grown men cry and dancers lose themselves in rhythm. The piano had been her voice, her identity, her very soul. But dementia doesn't care about legacy. It doesn't care about talent or achievement or the joy you once brought to the world. It simply takes. Slowly, cruelly, methodically. The music died first. Then the memories. Then the woman herself, or so it seemed. Now at 78, Loretta sat in that wheelchair, her eyes vacant, staring at a world she no longer recognized. The nurses spoke to her gently, but she rarely responded. Sometimes she would hum a tuneless sound that bore no resemblance to the complex jazz arrangements she had once commanded. Her family had mostly drifted away. It was too painful, they said, to see her like this. Too hard to watch someone they loved disappear piece by piece, day by day. But there was one person who never stopped coming. Calvin Monroe. 32 years old, Loretta's grandson. Calvin taught music at a local middle school. He had inherited his grandmother's love of music, though he would be the first to admit he possessed only a fraction of her talent. As a child, it had been Loretta who placed his small hands on the piano keys for the first time. Loretta, who taught him his first scales, who showed him how to feel the music, not just play it. Those memories were precious to him, sacred even. Now, every Tuesday and Thursday after school, Calvin would drive to the nursing home. He would pull up a chair beside his grandmother's wheelchair, take her weathered hand in his, and talk to her. Sometimes he told her about his students. Sometimes he played recordings of old jazz performances on his phone, holding it close to her ear. She never responded. never showed any sign that she heard him or knew who he was. But Calvin kept coming. On one particular Thursday evening in late autumn, as golden light filtered through the nursing home windows, Calvin sat beside his grandmother and made a decision. He couldn't keep doing this. Couldn't keep watching her fade away without fighting back, without trying something, anything to reach the woman he knew was still trapped somewhere inside that failing mind. Music had been her life. Music had been her language when words failed. If anything could reach her, it would be music. Not recordings played through a tinny phone speaker. Real music. A real piano. The feel of ivory keys beneath her fingers, the vibration of strings, the physical act of creation that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Calvin made a phone call that evening. To the director of the Magnolia Street Community Center, a woman named Patricia Williams, who had known Loretta back in her performing days. Miss Patricia, Calvin said, his voice thick with desperate hope. "I need to ask you a favor, a big one." The Magnolia Street Community Center was a hub of neighborhood life. A converted church building with creaking wooden floors and tall windows that let in streams of afternoon sunlight. In the main hall, pushed against one wall, stood an old upright piano. It wasn't in perfect condition. Some keys stuck. The tuning was off. But it was a real piano, and that was all that mattered. On a Saturday afternoon, 1 week after Calvin's phone call to Patricia Williams, he wheeled his grandmother through the community center doors. Loretta seemed agitated by the change in environment. She made small, distressed sounds, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. Calvin spoke to her softly, reassuringly, the way you might calm a frightened child. "It's okay, Grandma. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." Patricia Williams met them in the main hall. She was a woman in her late 60s with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. When she saw Loretta, her expression softened with a mixture of sorrow and something else. Hope, perhaps. "Sweet Keys," Patricia whispered, using Loretta's old stage name. "It's been too long." If Loretta heard, she gave no indication. Calvin wheeled her to the piano. The old instrument sat there like a silent sentinel, its wooden surface scarred by decades of use. He positioned Loretta's wheelchair in front of it, then gently took her hands and placed them on the keys. She jerked back as if burned. "It's okay," Calvin said again, his heart sinking. "It's just a piano, Grandma. Remember how you used to play?" He placed her hands on the keys again. This time she didn't pull away, but she didn't do anything else either. She simply sat there, her fingers resting limply on the ivory, her eyes staring at nothing. Calvin fought back the tears that threatened to spill. What had he expected? Some miracle cure, some instant transformation. He was about to give up, to wheel her back to the nursing home and admit defeat when something happened. Loretta's right index finger moved. Just slightly, just enough to press down a single key. The note rang out in the empty hall. Middle C, clear and pure, despite the piano's imperfect tuning. Loretta's head tilted slightly as if she was listening, as if that single note had reached some deep, buried part of her consciousness. Calvin held his breath. Her finger pressed the key again. Same note. Then again. Then her left hand moved almost involuntarily and pressed another key. Then another. It wasn't music. Not yet. Just random notes, disconnected and arrhythmic. But it was something. It was movement. It was response. Patricia Williams stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, watching with wide eyes. For the next 10 minutes, Loretta continued to press keys. Sometimes the same note repeatedly. Sometimes a chaotic jumble of sounds. But her eyes, those vacant eyes, seemed to have a flicker of something in them now. Concentration, perhaps. Or recognition. Calvin didn't dare speak, didn't dare move. He just stood beside her, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks, and watched his grandmother's fingers explore the keyboard, like someone relearning the shape of their own face. Finally, Loretta's hands stilled. She slumped back in her wheelchair, exhausted by the effort. But for just a moment, just a fleeting instant, she turned her head and looked at Calvin. Really looked at him. Then the moment passed, and the blankness returned to her eyes. But it was enough. It was a beginning. "We'll come back," Calvin said to Patricia, his voice shaking with emotion. "We'll come back every week if that's okay." Patricia nodded, wiping tears from her own eyes. "You bring her as often as you want. That piano is hers." And so began a ritual that would consume Calvin's life for the next several months. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, and every Saturday, Calvin would sign his grandmother out of the nursing home and drive her to the Magnolia Street Community Center. He would wheel her to the piano place, her hands on the keys, and wait. The progress was agonizingly slow. In the beginning, Loretta would simply press random keys, creating cacophonous noise rather than music. Some days she would refuse to touch the piano at all, becoming agitated and distressed. Calvin would sit beside her, playing simple melodies himself, hoping something would trigger a response. The nursing home staff thought he was wasting his time. Some of them said so, albeit gently. Mr. Monroe, one nurse, told him dementia doesn't work that way. Those neural pathways are gone. What you're doing is kind, but you need to prepare yourself for the reality of the situation. But Calvin had seen that flicker in his grandmother's eyes. That moment of recognition. He couldn't give up on her. Wouldn't give up. Slowly, imperceptibly, at first things began to change. In the third week, Loretta pressed keys in a pattern. Not random anymore. A sequence of notes that almost resembled a melody, though not one Calvin recognized. In the fifth week, she played a simple scale. C major. Up and down her fingers, finding the right keys without hesitation, as if they remembered what her mind had forgotten. Calvin wept when he heard it. A scale. Just a simple scale, the first thing any piano student learns. But from his grandmother's fingers, it was a symphony. Patricia Williams started coming to watch. Then other members of the community center staff. Word spread through the neighborhood about what was happening. The old jazz legend, the woman they all thought was gone forever, playing piano again. In the 8th week, something extraordinary happened. Calvin had just settled Loretta in front of the piano, had placed her hands on the keys, as he always did when she began to play without any prompting from him. Not random notes this time, not scales or exercises. A song. Her fingers moved across the keys with increasing confidence, playing an old blues progression. It was rough, hesitant, but unmistakably intentional. Unmistakably music. Calvin recognized it after a few bars. Ain't Misbehavin'. A Fats Waller composition that Loretta had performed countless times in her performing days. She played for maybe 30 seconds before her hands faltered and stopped. But it was enough. It was more than enough. "You remembered," Calvin whispered, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "Grandma, you remembered." Loretta turned to look at him. For a moment, her eyes were clear, focused. Her lips moved, forming a word. Calvin. His name. She had said his name. Then, just as quickly, the clarity faded. Her gaze became distant, again lost. But she had said his name. She had known him, if only for a heartbeat. Patricia Williams, who had witnessed the entire exchange, approached Calvin afterward. "I've seen a lot in my years," she said, "but nothing quite like this. Calvin, what you're doing for her, what you're awakening in her, it's remarkable. I just want her back, Calvin said simply. Even if it's just for moments. Even if it's just when she's playing. Patricia was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "We're having our annual community fundraiser in 3 months, a talent show. Local performers, mostly kids, raising money for after-school programs. What if Loretta performed? Calvin's immediate reaction was fear. Miss Patricia, I don't know if she could handle that. A crowd, the pressure being on stage. Think about it, Patricia said gently. Music is reaching her in ways nothing else can. Maybe performing, being back in that element, might reach even deeper. And if she can't do it, if it's too much, we'll understand. But Calvin, what if she can? What if this is exactly what she needs?" Calvin looked at his grandmother, now sitting quietly in her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant, but somehow more peaceful than he had seen them in months. What if indeed? For days, Calvin wrestled with the decision. On one hand, the idea terrified him. His grandmother, who could barely remember his name most days, performing in front of a crowd. What if she froze? What if the stress made her condition worse? What if he was pushing her too hard, asking too much? On the other hand, he had seen what music did to her, how her fingers came alive on those keys, how for brief moments she seemed to come back to herself. He talked to her doctors. They were skeptical, but not dismissive. Music therapy has shown promise with dementia patients, one doctor explained. The part of the brain that processes music is often one of the last areas affected by the disease. There are cases of patients who can't remember their own children, but can still play instruments or sing songs they learned decades ago. It's not a cure, Mr. Monroe. It won't stop the progression of the disease. But if it brings her some joy, some connection to herself, then it's worth exploring. That Tuesday, when Calvin took Loretta to the community center, he wheeled her up to the piano as always. But this time, before placing her hands on the keys, he knelt down in front of her and took her weathered hands in his. "Grandma," he said, looking into her vacant eyes, hoping some part of her could hear him, could understand him. "Miss Patricia wants you to play at the fundraiser, in front of people, like you used to do back in the day, back when you were Sweet Keys." No response, just that blank stare. "I know you're in there somewhere," Calvin continued, his voice breaking. "I know you can hear me, even if you can't show it, and I know you're scared. Hell, I'm scared too. But Grandma, you were born to play. Music is who you are. And I really think that if we can get you up on that stage, if we can get you in front of that crowd, something might happen. Something good." He waited, hoping for some sign, some acknowledgement. Then slowly, so slowly, he almost missed it. Loretta's fingers squeezed his hand. Just once, just barely. But it was intentional, it was a yes. Calvin's breath caught. "Okay then," he whispered. "Okay, we'll do it. Together." He placed her hands on the piano keys and she began to play. That same blues progression from the week before, but stronger now, more confident. Her fingers remembered what her mind couldn't hold on to. And in that moment, Calvin made a promise to himself and to her. He would get her ready. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would help her prepare for this performance. Not because it would cure her, not because it would bring back the woman she used to be permanently, but because for one night, for one shining moment, Loretta Hayes would be Sweet Keys again. Over the next 3 months, their routine intensified. Calvin came to the community center every day. He would play recordings of Loretta's old performances, trying to jog her memory. He would sit beside her at the piano and play duets with her, guiding her through the melodies. Some days were better than others. There were good days when Loretta would play for an hour straight, her fingers moving across the keys with something approaching her old mastery. She would play jazz standards, blues progressions, even classical pieces that Calvin didn't know she had in her repertoire. On those days, Calvin felt hope surge through him like electricity. This was going to work. She was going to do it. But there were bad days too. Days when Loretta couldn't remember how to sit upright, let alone play piano. Days when she would cry out in confusion, not knowing where she was or who Calvin was. Days when he would have to take her back to the nursing home without her having touched a single key. On those days, Calvin questioned everything. Was he doing the right thing? Was this helping her, or just feeding his own desperate need to have his grandmother back? Patricia Williams would find him on those days, sitting in the empty community center hall, his head in his hands. Doubt is part of love, she would tell him. If you weren't questioning yourself, if you weren't worrying about what's best for her, that would be the problem. But Calvin, I've been watching her. On her good days, I see something in her eyes I haven't seen in years. Peace, purpose, joy. You're giving her that. As the fundraiser approached, word spread through the neighborhood. Loretta Hayes was going to perform. Sweet Keys was coming back. Old musicians who had played with her in the 60s and 70s started showing up at the community center, wanting to see for themselves. Some were skeptical, others were supportive. All of them were curious. Is it really her one old trumpet player? Asked Calvin. I mean, really her, can she actually still play? Come to the show, Calvin said. See for yourself. 2 weeks before the performance, Calvin chose the piece Loretta would play, Georgia on My Mind. It had been one of her signature songs, one she had performed hundreds of times. If any piece was embedded deep enough in her muscle memory to survive the dementia, it would be this one. He played the recording for her over and over. Ray Charles's version, her own version from a live recording in 1974. He would sit beside her at the piano and play it slowly, key by key, hoping she would follow along. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. 1 week before the performance, Calvin woke up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding with anxiety. What had he done? He had set his grandmother up for potential humiliation. What if she couldn't do it? What if she sat there on that stage, confused and frightened, while hundreds of people watched? He couldn't do that to her. He had to cancel. The next morning, he went to the nursing home early before his usual time. He found Loretta in the common room, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, as always. "Grandma," he said, kneeling beside her. "I'm sorry. I think I made a mistake. The performance, I don't think we should do it. I don't want to put you through that." Loretta didn't respond. She rarely did anymore. But then something extraordinary happened. She turned her head to look at him directly. Her eyes, usually so vacant, were clear, focused. And she spoke, her voice raspy from disuse, but unmistakably hers. "I'll play." Just 2 words. But they changed everything. Grandma Calvin's eyes filled with tears. "You understand? You know what I'm talking about." "I'll play," she repeated. Then with tremendous effort she added, "Music remembers." The clarity faded as quickly as it had come. Her eyes grew distant again, her expression slack. But she had spoken. She had understood. And she had made her choice. Calvin stood up, wiping his eyes, his heart full of a mixture of terror and awe. They were going to do this. The final week before the performance was a blur of activity and emotion. The community rallied around Loretta and Calvin in ways that took his breath away. Local musicians volunteered to accompany her if needed to provide backup in case she struggled. The community center staff decorated the hall, setting up rows of chairs, testing the sound system, making sure the piano was tuned to perfection. Patricia Williams organized rehearsals, but kept them low-key and pressure-free. just Calvin, Loretta, and a handful of supportive community members watching as the old woman's fingers found their way across the keys. Loretta's condition continued to fluctuate wildly. On Monday, 5 days before the show, she played Georgia on My Mind flawlessly from start to finish. Calvin recorded it on his phone, crying as he listened. She could do this. She really could. On Tuesday, she didn't recognize the piano and became distressed when Calvin tried to guide her hands to the keys. He had to cut the session short. On Wednesday, she played beautifully for the first minute, then stopped abruptly and looked at Calvin with such profound confusion that his heart broke. "Where am I?" she asked. "Where's James?" James had been her husband, Calvin's grandfather. He had died 15 years ago. "He's not here right now," Grandma Calvin said gently, not having the heart to remind her that James was gone. On Thursday, 2 days before the performance, Calvin brought his mother to meet them at the community center. Diane Monroe, Loretta's daughter, who hadn't seen her mother in over a year because the pain of watching her decline was too much. Diane stood in the doorway of the hall, watching as Calvin guided Loretta through Georgia on My Mind one more time. When the song ended, Diane was crying. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "I can't believe she can still do that." "Some things go deeper than memory," Patricia Williams said from beside her. "Music doesn't live in the same part of the brain that dementia attacks. It lives somewhere else, somewhere primal, somewhere that can't be taken away." That evening, as Calvin drove Loretta back to the nursing home, he made a decision. Whatever happened on Saturday night, whether she played flawlessly or couldn't play at all, it would be worth it. This journey, these months of Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday sessions, had given him something precious: time with his grandmother. Real time, not just sitting beside her in silence, but connecting with her through the one language she still understood: music. Friday night, the evening before the performance, Calvin couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario in his mind. What if she froze? What if she couldn't remember? What if the crowd made her anxious? What if this entire thing was a terrible mistake? But then he remembered her words from that morning in the nursing home. "I'll play." Music remembers. If she wasn't afraid, why should he be? At 3 in the morning, Calvin got out of bed and drove to the community center. Patricia had given him a key weeks ago. He let himself in, walked to the piano in the dark hall, and sat down. He played Georgia on My Mind himself, slowly pouring all his hope and fear and love into every note. When he finished, he sat in the silence for a long moment. "Please," he whispered to whatever forces might be listening. "Please let her have this moment. Just this one moment." Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and unseasonably warm weather for late winter in New Orleans. Calvin picked up his grandmother from the nursing home at 2 in the afternoon. The show wasn't until 7, but he wanted plenty of time to get her settled to let her acclimate to the space before the crowd arrived. The nursing home staff had dressed Loretta in a beautiful emerald green dress that Diane had brought. It had been one of Loretta's performance dresses from the old days, carefully preserved in storage for decades. The staff had even styled her hair, pulling it back in an elegant bun, with a few silver curls framing her face. She looked like Sweet Keys again. "You look beautiful, Grandma," Calvin said, his voice thick with emotion. Loretta didn't respond, but there was something in her eyes. Not quite awareness, but not complete absence either. Something in between. At the community center, the staff had transformed the main hall. The piano had been moved to center stage, polished until it gleamed. Lights had been set up. Flowers adorned the stage. Rows of chairs faced the performance area, enough seating for 300 people. Calvin wheeled Loretta backstage to a small room that had been set up as a green room. Patricia was there, along with Diane and a few other community members who had become part of Loretta's support system over the past months. "How is she?" Patricia asked. Calvin looked at his grandmother sitting quietly in her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap, her expression distant. "I don't know," he admitted. "Some days I think she understands everything. Other days, nothing. Today I honestly can't tell." "It doesn't matter," Diane said, surprising everyone, including herself. She had been so resistant to this idea at first, so convinced it would end in disaster. But something had changed in her. Whether she remembers or not, whether she plays perfectly or not at all, she's here. She's trying. That's what matters. As the hours passed, the hall began to fill with people. Community members arrived first. Families with children. Teenagers. Elderly couples who remembered Loretta from the old days. Then came the musicians. Older black men and women who had played the jazz circuit in the 60s and 70s. They came with their own instruments, forming an impromptu backing band in case Loretta needed support. By 6:45, every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. Backstage, Calvin was pacing. Loretta sat in her wheelchair, seemingly oblivious to the activity around her. She hadn't spoken all day, hadn't shown any sign that she understood what was about to happen. Patricia placed a hand on Calvin's shoulder. "Whatever happens out there, you gave her this. You gave her music again. That's a gift, Calvin. That's love." At 6:55, the house lights dimmed. The crowd quieted. Patricia Williams walked onto the stage, standing in a spotlight, holding a microphone. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Thank you all for coming to our annual community fundraiser. Tonight is special for many reasons, but there's one performance I want to highlight before we begin." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Some of you old-timers might remember a woman named Loretta Hayes. Some of you young folks might not know that name, but your grandparents probably do. Back in the 60s and 70s, Loretta Hayes, known as Sweet Keys, was one of the finest jazz pianists this city ever produced. She played in clubs up and down this street and beyond. She brought joy and beauty into the world through her music. The crowd was silent, listening intently. Loretta has been living with dementia for several years now. Patricia continued, her voice softening. She lost the music, lost the memories, lost herself, we thought. But her grandson, Calvin Monroe, refused to give up on her. For months, he's been bringing her here, working with her, helping her find her way back to the piano. Calvin stood backstage, holding his breath. Tonight, Patricia said, "Loretta Hayes is going to play for you." I won't lie to you folks. I don't know exactly what's going to happen out here, but I do know this. You're about to witness something extraordinary. You're about to see the power of music, the power of love, and the power of the human spirit. Please welcome, after far too many years away, Sweet Keys herself, Loretta Hayes. The crowd erupted in applause. Calvin's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. He knelt down in front of his grandmother's wheelchair. "Grandma," he said quietly, taking her hands. "It's time. They're waiting for you. They want to hear you play." Loretta's eyes were distant, unfocused. Calvin felt panic rising in his throat. She wasn't there. She didn't understand. This was going to be a disaster. But then he remembered something. He started humming very softly. "Georgia on My Mind," the melody they had practiced hundreds of times. And slowly, so slowly, Loretta's eyes began to focus. She looked at Calvin. Really looked at him. "Calvin," she whispered. "Yeah, Grandma. It's me. Are you ready to play?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with tremendous effort, she nodded. Calvin stood his legs shaking and wheeled her toward the stage. The applause grew louder as Calvin wheeled Loretta onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding. The crowd was a sea of faces, some familiar, most not. The energy in the room was electric, charged with anticipation and hope, and no small amount of anxiety. Calvin positioned Loretta's wheelchair in front of the piano bench, then with infinite gentleness helped her stand. She was shaky on her feet, and he kept his hands on her arms, steadying her. Together they moved the few steps to the piano bench. Calvin helped her sit, adjusting her position, making sure she was comfortable. The crowd had fallen silent. You could hear people breathing. The scrape of a chair, a cough from the back. Calvin stepped away from the piano, but not far. He positioned himself just to the side of the stage where Loretta could see him if she looked up. Loretta sat at the piano, her hands resting in her lap. She stared at the keys, as if she had never seen them before. Seconds ticked by. 10 seconds, 20. Calvin could feel the crowd getting restless. Concerned murmurs rippled through the audience. He was about to step forward to end this, to wheel her off stage and apologize and get her out of this situation that had clearly become too much for her. But then Patricia Williams, still standing at the side of the stage, began to hum. Very quietly. So quietly that at first Calvin wasn't sure he was hearing it. Georgia on my mind. Other voices joined in. The old musicians in the crowd recognizing the tune humming along. Then more voices. And more. The entire hall filled with the gentle hum of that familiar melody. And Loretta, sitting at the piano, tilted her head slightly, listening. Her right hand moved. Slowly, deliberately. She placed it on the keys. Then her left hand joined it. The humming continued, a gentle encouragement, a reminder, a prayer. Loretta's fingers pressed down. The opening notes of Georgia on My Mind rang out clear and true. The humming stopped. The crowd held its breath. Loretta continued to play. The notes were tentative at first, soft and uncertain. Her fingers trembled on the keys, but she was playing. The melody was recognizable, the rhythm uncertain, but present. Calvin's vision blurred with tears. Slowly, measure by measure, something began to change. Loretta's fingers moved with increasing confidence. The tempo steadied. The dynamics grew swelling and receding in all the right places. She was playing from memory. True memory. Not the cognitive memory that dementia had stolen, but muscle memory. Emotional memory. The kind of memory that lives in the body, in the bones, in the very fiber of who a person is. The crowd was transfixed. 300 people not moving, barely breathing, watching an elderly woman with dementia play one of the most beautiful songs ever written. As Loretta played, something remarkable happened. Her posture changed. She sat up straighter. Her shoulders, which had been hunched and collapsed for months, pulled back. Her head lifted. The frailty seemed to fall away, replaced by something else. Dignity, purpose, mastery. This was no longer a confused old woman struggling with an instrument. This was Sweet Keys. This was a master at her craft. As the melody progressed, Loretta began to add embellishments. Jazz runs and flourishes that weren't in the standard arrangement. These were her touches, her style, her voice coming through the piano. Calvin watched, mesmerized, as his grandmother's hands moved across the keys with increasing fluidity. It was as if the music was pulling her back from wherever she had been lost. Each note was a thread weaving her consciousness back together, if only temporarily. The song built to its emotional peak that moment where Ray Charles's version always soared and Loretta's playing soared with it. Her right hand climbed the keyboard in a series of cascading notes, while her left hand held down a steady, soulful bass line. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Loretta's eyes, which had been staring blankly at the keys, suddenly focused, sharpened, became aware. She looked up, not at the crowd, but at her hands, at the piano, as if seeing them for the first time in years. And then, impossibly miraculously, she smiled. A genuine smile. A smile of recognition. Of joy. Of coming home. Several people in the audience gasped. Others began to cry openly. Calvin covered his mouth with his hand, overwhelmed by what he was witnessing. Loretta continued to play, and as she played, memories seemed to flood back. You could see it happening. The way her expression changed. The way her body moved with the music swaying slightly, the way she used to when she performed decades ago. For these moments, for these precious few minutes, dementia didn't exist. The disease that had stolen so much from her had no power here. Music was stronger. Music was eternal. The song moved into its final verse, and Loretta's playing became even more assured, more expressive. She added an improvised bridge, something that wasn't in any standard version of the song, but that felt absolutely right. It was pure jazz, spontaneous creation, the thing that had made her performances legendary in the first place. The old musicians in the crowd recognized what she was doing. They looked at each other with wide eyes and knowing nods. She was back. Sweet Keys was really, truly back. But Calvin, watching from the side of the stage, knew the truth that perhaps the audience didn't fully grasp. This was temporary. This moment, this performance, this return to herself, it wouldn't last. Tomorrow, maybe even an hour from now, the fog would return. The blankness would settle back over her eyes. She would forget this performance, forget the crowd, forget that she had just done the impossible. But that didn't make it any less real, any less powerful, any less miraculous. If anything, knowing that this moment was fleeting made it more precious. Loretta played the final phrase of the song, her fingers dancing across the keys with grace and precision. She held the last chord, letting it ring out in the silent hall, sustaining it, making it last as long as possible. When she finally released the keys, when that final note faded into silence, the hall remained absolutely still. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire audience was afraid that any sound, any movement would break the spell, would shatter the fragile magic of what they had just witnessed. Then Patricia Williams began to clap. Slowly at first. Then others joined. Then more. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding wildly. People were crying, shouting. Some were laughing with pure joy. The standing ovation went on and on. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. Loretta sat at the piano looking confused now, overwhelmed by the noise and movement. The clarity that had come with the music was already beginning to fade. Calvin rushed onto the stage. He knelt beside her, taking her hands. "You did it, Grandma," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You were amazing." Loretta looked at him. Her eyes were clouded again, uncertain. But there was something there. A flicker of recognition, of connection. "Calvin?" she said, her voice barely audible over the applause. "Yeah, Grandma, it's me." She looked at him for a long moment, as if she was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Then she said quietly, "Just for him? Did I play good?" Calvin let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. "You played perfectly. You were perfect." Loretta smiled vaguely, then looked back at the piano as if surprised to find herself sitting at one. Diane appeared on the other side, kneeling down, taking her mother's other hand. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." Loretta looked at her daughter. There was a long pause, and Calvin held his breath, wondering if she would recognize Diane. "Diane," Loretta said finally, uncertainly. "Yes, Mom, it's me. I'm tired," Loretta said, and the childlike quality of her voice broke both their hearts. "I know, Mom. Let's get you somewhere quiet." But before they could move, something else happened. Several older black men and women from the audience began to make their way to the stage. Musicians from Loretta's era, people who had played with her in the smoky clubs of the French Quarter 50 years ago. An old man with white hair and a saxophone case approached. "Sweet keys," he said, his voice full of emotion. "It's me, Monroe Davis. We used to play together at Preservation Hall." Loretta looked at him blankly at first, but then slowly her eyes widened slightly. "Monroe," she said uncertainly. "Yeah, baby, it's me. You haven't lost it. You hear me? You haven't lost it." More old friends gathered around. Some she seemed to vaguely recognize, others not at all. But there was something profound about this gathering. These survivors, these witnesses to a time and a culture that had been vibrant and alive despite the racism and hardship they had all faced. They were honoring one of their own, welcoming her back, even knowing she was only visiting, only here for a moment. Patricia Williams stepped forward with the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Loretta Hayes." Another wave of applause crashed over the stage. Calvin helped Loretta stand. She was unsteady, leaning heavily on him, but he got her upright. For just a moment, she looked out at the crowd. Did she understand what had just happened? Did she comprehend the magnitude of what she had accomplished? It was impossible to say. But for just a second, Calvin thought he saw it in her eyes. Pride. Satisfaction. The look of someone who knows they've done something important. Then the moment passed, and she slumped against him, exhausted. "Let's get you backstage, Grandma," he said gently. As he helped her off the stage, the applause continued. The old musicians began to play, picking up where Loretta had left off, turning the moment into an impromptu jam session, a celebration, a tribute. Backstage. Calvin settled Loretta into her wheelchair. She was already drifting, her eyes glazing over, retreating back into that internal fog. But Calvin didn't care. For 10 minutes, for one song, for one shining moment, his grandmother had been herself again. She had touched those keys and found herself in the music. And 300 people had witnessed a miracle. The performance became the talk of New Orleans. Local news stations covered it. "Woman with dementia delivers stunning piano performance," read the headlines. The video that someone had recorded on their phone went viral on social media, racking up millions of views. People who had never heard of Loretta Hayes suddenly knew her story. Musicians from around the country reached out, sharing their own stories of music's power to reach through the darkness of cognitive decline. But for Calvin and Diane, the aftermath was more complicated. The morning after the performance, when Calvin went to visit Loretta at the nursing home, she didn't remember any of it. Not the performance, not the applause, not the standing ovation. She sat in her wheelchair by the window, staring at nothing, just as she had for months before. Grandma Calvin said, sitting beside her, holding up his phone with the video queued up. "Look, this is you, from last night. You played piano in front of hundreds of people." Loretta watched the video with no apparent recognition. When it ended, she looked at Calvin with confused eyes. "Who's that?" she asked. Calvin felt his heart crack. "That's you, Grandma. That's you playing." She looked back at the phone screen, then at Calvin, then shook her head slightly, dismissing it. It would have been crushing if Calvin hadn't already understood the truth. The performance wasn't about giving Loretta her memory back permanently. It was never going to do that. Dementia doesn't work that way. The disease would continue its cruel progression, but the performance had given her something just as important. It had given her moments of connection, moments of joy, moments of being truly alive and present in ways she hadn't been in years. And it had given Calvin something too. The knowledge that love and persistence and hope weren't futile. That even in the face of a disease as cruel as dementia, there were still victories to be won. Small ones, temporary ones, but victories nonetheless. He continued to take Loretta to the community center. 3 times a week, just like before. Sometimes she would play, sometimes she wouldn't. Some days her fingers would find beautiful melodies. Other days she would just press random keys. But Calvin kept bringing her, kept placing her hands on those ivories, kept believing that somewhere in some deep part of her consciousness, the music still lived. Word of Loretta's performance spread through the medical community as well. Researchers studying dementia and music therapy reached out to Calvin, asking permission to document Loretta's sessions. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neurologist specializing in dementia research, came to observe one of Loretta's practice sessions at the community center. Afterward, she spoke with Calvin privately. "What you're witnessing is extraordinary," Dr. Chen explained. Musical memory is stored differently than other types of memory. It involves multiple areas of the brain working together. Often these pathways remain intact, even when other cognitive functions have severely declined. Your grandmother's procedural memory, the memory for how to do things, especially things practiced for years that can persist long after declarative memory, the memory for facts and events, has failed. So she can remember how to play, but not that she played, Calvin asked. Exactly. It's why she can perform a complex piece, but then not remember the performance minutes later. The skill is still there, embedded in her muscle memory and her emotional memory, even though her conscious cognitive memory is compromised. Will it last? Calvin asked. The ability to play Dr. Chen's expression was sympathetic. The disease will continue to progress. Eventually, yes, she'll likely lose even this ability. But Calvin, what you're doing is giving her quality of life right now. Every moment she spends at that piano connecting with music, experiencing joy that matters. That's real. Don't discount it just because it's temporary. The community center started hosting regular music and memory sessions, inspired by Loretta's story. Other families brought their elderly loved ones with dementia. Sometimes they would sing together. Sometimes people would play instruments. Sometimes they would just listen. Loretta became a fixture at these gatherings, sometimes playing, sometimes just present. The community rallied around her in beautiful ways. People would bring flowers, share memories of seeing her perform decades ago. Thank Calvin for not giving up. One afternoon, about 2 months after the big performance, Calvin was sitting with Loretta at the piano. She had been playing Summertime, another standard from her performing days, when she suddenly stopped mid-phrase. She turned to look at Calvin and her eyes were clear. Lucid. "I'm disappearing," she said quietly. "Aren't I?" The question hit Calvin like a physical blow. These moments of clarity were so rare now. "Grandma," he started, but she shook her head. "It's okay," she said. "I know. I can feel it. Like I'm fading away a little more each day. But when I play..." She looked down at the piano keys. "When I play, I'm still me. Even if just for a minute." "You understand? I understand." Calvin said, his voice thick with tears. "Thank you," Loretta said, reaching out to touch his face. "Thank you for bringing me back to the music, for remembering who I was even when I couldn't. Then, as quickly as the clarity had come, it faded. Her eyes grew distant again. She turned back to the piano and began playing once more, the moment of awareness gone, as if it had never been. But it had been real. Calvin had witnessed it, and he would hold on to that moment for the rest of his life. In the months that followed, Calvin had a lot of time to think about what had happened, about what his grandmother's journey meant not just for their family, but for anyone dealing with the heartbreak of dementia. He thought about how easy it would have been to give up, to accept the doctor's initial prognosis that Loretta was gone, that there was no reaching her, that he should make his peace with losing her. He thought about how close he had come to not trying at all. But he had tried, and in trying, he had discovered something profound. People with dementia are still people, still deserving of dignity, of effort, of love. The disease may steal their memories, may steal their ability to communicate in conventional ways, may steal so much of who they were. But it doesn't steal everything. Music therapy isn't a cure. Calvin knew that. The researchers knew that. Anyone who worked with dementia patients knew that. But it is something. It's a bridge, a connection, a way to reach across that terrible divide between the person who is fading and the people who love them. For Loretta, music was that bridge. For others, it might be art or dance or familiar scents or old photographs. The specifics didn't matter as much as the principle. Don't give up. Don't stop trying to reach them. Don't assume that because they can't communicate in the ways they used to, they're not still in there somewhere. Calvin began speaking at support groups for families dealing with dementia. He would tell Loretta's story, show the video of her performance, and then talk about what he had learned. The hardest part, he would say, is accepting that you're not going to get the person back the way they were. You have to grieve that loss while the person is still alive. That's brutal. That's one of the cruelest things about this disease. But he would continue, you can have moments, brief, beautiful moments where they're present, where they're themselves, and those moments matter. They're not less real or less valuable just because they don't last. If anything, their temporary nature makes them more precious. He would always end by saying, don't wait for a miracle cure. Don't waste time wishing things were different. Find what reaches them, whatever it is, and use it. Give them those moments. Give yourself those moments. Because in the end, that's all any of us have. Moments. And we get to choose whether to fill them with connection and love or with regret. Loretta's story also sparked conversations about funding for dementia research and support for music therapy programs. Patricia Williams turned the community center into a hub for dementia support, offering regular programming for affected families. Local musicians donated their time performing for and with dementia patients. Young music students from Calvin's school started volunteering, learning early about the power of their art to heal and connect. The ripple effects of one old woman's performance spread wider than Calvin could have imagined. But through it all, Calvin kept up his routine. 3 times a week, he would pick up Loretta from the nursing home and bring her to the piano. By month 6 after the performance, her abilities were declining. She could still play sometimes, but the pieces were simpler, the execution less confident. By month 9, she rarely played full songs anymore, mostly just fragments, phrases that would trail off into silence. Calvin knew what was coming. The doctors had warned him. Eventually, she would lose even this ability. But he kept bringing her, kept placing her hands on those keys, because even if she couldn't play anymore, even if she just sat there, being in that space, being surrounded by music, seemed to bring her some measure of peace. And really, that was the goal all along. not to cure her, not to turn back time, just to give her peace, to let her know she was loved, to honor who she had been and who she still was underneath the fog. One Tuesday afternoon, nearly a year after the big performance, Calvin sat beside Loretta at the piano. She hadn't played in weeks. Mostly she just sat staring at the keys with no recognition. But on this day, Calvin didn't try to make her play. He just sat with her, his arm around her shoulders, and he talked to her about his students, about his life, about how much he loved her. And then, without prompting, without any apparent reason, Loretta's right hand moved to the piano. She played one note. Just one. Middle C. Then she turned to Calvin and smiled. A small, vague smile, but a smile nonetheless. It was enough. It was more than enough. "I love you, Grandma," Calvin said. She didn't respond with words, but she leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there together in the quiet community center hall, with that single note still echoing in the air. Some moments don't need words. Loretta Hayes passed away peacefully in her sleep, 2 years after her memorable performance at the Magnolia Street Community Center fundraiser. She was 80 years old. In those final 2 years, her dementia had progressed to the point where she could no longer play piano, could no longer speak, could no longer do much of anything except exist in a state of profound confusion and disconnection. It was heartbreaking to watch. Calvin won't lie about that. But here's what he wants you to know. What he wants anyone dealing with dementia to understand. Those 2 years of decline don't erase the year of connection that came before. The performance doesn't become less meaningful because it was temporary. The moments of clarity don't lose their value because they were brief. Loretta had lived 80 years. For 76 of those years, she had been fully herself. A brilliant musician, a devoted wife, a loving mother and grandmother, a force of nature who brought joy to everyone around her. Dementia took 4 years of her life. Just 4. That's terrible, yes. That's cruel and unfair and heartbreaking. But it didn't take everything. It couldn't erase the music she had created, the lives she had touched, the love she had given. And in that next to last year before the final decline, Calvin had given her something back. Music. Connection. Moments of being fully alive and present. That matters. That counts. At Loretta's funeral, held in the same hall where she had given her comeback performance, nearly 500 people attended. Old musicians, young students, community members, friends, and family. Patricia Williams spoke. Diane spoke. Several of Loretta's old musical colleagues spoke, sharing stories of her talent and her spirit. Then Calvin stepped up to the microphone. He didn't have a prepared speech. He just spoke from his heart. "My grandmother taught me a lot of things," he said. "She taught me how to play piano, though I never came close to her skill. She taught me about jazz, about the history of black music in this city. She taught me about perseverance, about fighting for your place in a world that doesn't always want to make room for you." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "But the most important thing she taught me in the last years of her life, when dementia had taken so much from her. She taught me that love persists, that who we are at our core, that essential spark that makes us human, that can survive even when our memories can't. She taught me never to give up on people, never to assume that just because someone can't communicate in the ways we're used to, they're not still in there, still worthy of dignity and effort and love." His voice broke. He took a moment to compose himself. "Music was my grandmother's language. In her final years, when words failed her, when recognition failed her, the music remained. And through that music, she taught me her final lesson. Some bonds go deeper than memory. Love, real love, lives in places that disease can't reach. After the service, Calvin sat at the piano in the now empty hall. The same piano where Loretta had played her final performance. He played Georgia on my mind, slowly, carefully thinking of his grandmother with every note. When he finished, he sat in the silence for a long moment. Then he heard it. Just barely. Maybe it was his imagination. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was something else entirely. But he could have sworn he heard humming. That old familiar melody in a voice he would recognize anywhere. Calvin smiled through his tears. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered to the empty hall. "Thank you for the music. Thank you for everything." The piano stood silent, waiting for the next person who would need its healing power, who would find their way back to themselves through its keys. Because that's what music does. It endures. It heals. It connects us to parts of ourselves we thought were lost forever. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it gives us miracles. Not permanent ones, not cure-all ones, but real ones nonetheless. If you or someone you love is dealing with dementia, please know this: you're not alone. There are resources available. Music therapy, art therapy, support groups, medical interventions that can help manage symptoms and improve quality of life. But more than anything, there's love. There's patience. There's the willingness to meet people where they are, to connect with them in whatever ways still work to give them dignity and joy, even in the midst of such a cruel disease. Don't give up. Keep trying. Keep reaching. Because you never know when you might give someone a moment of clarity, a moment of peace, a moment of being truly themselves again. And those moments matter. They really, truly matter. If Loretta's story touched you, if it resonated with your own experiences or gave you hope for your own situation, please share it. Share her music. Share her memory. Share the message that love and music and human connection can reach places that medicine can't. Thank you for listening to Loretta's story. Thank you for taking this journey with Calvin, with Diane, with Patricia, and with Sweet Keys herself. May we all be so lucky to have people in our lives who refuse to give up on us, who see us truly, who love us, even when we can't remember who we are. And may we all be those people for someone else.